I would like to call to order the October 16th, 2023 D303 Special School Board Meeting at 5:15 p.m. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll?
Yes, Mrs. Bell. Here. Mr. Kuchert.
Here.
Mr. Lackner.
Here.
Mr. Lentz.
Here.
Mrs. McCabe.
Here.
Mr. McNally.
Here.
And Mrs. Fairgrave.
Here, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now we will move to the first for action section of the agenda, and we are very happy that Mr. Lackner is here, so we can disregard that item. Moving to section 3, citizen comments. Are there any citizen comments at this time? There are none. So we will now move to section 4 of the agenda, which is for action. Item A, approval of settlement agreement with Nicole Cournaya. Can I have a motion to approve the settlement agreement with Nicole Cournaya?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. McNally. Any discussion at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Yes, Mr. Kuchert.
Yes.
Mr. Lackner.
Yes.
Mr. Lentz.
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe.
No.
Mr. McNally.
Yes.
Mrs. Bell.
No.
Mrs. Fairgrave.
No. Motion passes with a vote of 4-3. And next at this time, can I have a motion to adjourn the October 16th, 2023 D303 Special Board Meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. McNally, thank you. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Yes, Mr. Lackner.
Yes.
Mr. Lentz.
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe.
Yes.
Mr. McNally.
Yes.
Mrs. Bell.
Yes.
Mr. Kuchert.
Yes.
And Mrs. Fairgrave.
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Our special board meeting is adjourned at 5:17 p.m. And just for the audience's purposes, we will begin the Learning and Teaching Committee meeting starting at the bottom of the hour, so 5:30.
I'm going to stay till about 6:45.
I like that. Get a little earlier? I mean, I think it just provides a balancing act, right? Like, oh my God, I don't believe it. Okay.
All done? All right.
All right, well, that was simple. QED.
Only one thing. That might be the world record for a regular meeting. Well, no, it was a special meeting, but
it was pretty fast.
2 minutes. I don't think
Literally
so.
2 minutes.
I don't
More
think it's,
conversation about the schedule than there was in
Well,
the meeting.
well, yes. But I don't think there's ever been a 2 minute.
Glad you could join us, Joe.
special
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's all working out really well.
Don't be sorry at all. You know, your way here. I'm actually suggestions.
I mean, he's just putting you right out of there.
Have you guys had these limoncello LaCroix? They taste just like white cake. Have you ever had a piece of white cake?
Yeah, I love the.
Your mic is still.
Good evening.
That's why you.
And-
Yeah, Sajid was pretty clear on this one. They're like,
Welcome to the Learning and Teaching Committee meeting today, October 16th. We're calling it to order. Are there any citizen comments? We have one citizen comment.
Okay, during the public comment period, members of the public body who wish to speak are asked to first state their name and the community in which they reside. Each individual will have up to 3 minutes to address the board on the topic of their choosing. We ask all individuals who address the board to do so with respect and civility towards others. Please note that personnel matters are sensitive and confidential. We also want to inform our speakers that all regular, special, and committee meetings are live streamed and are available for viewing at any time on the district's YouTube channel. While the board will not respond to today's public comment during this meeting, we are committed to listening to you to help support our work for the district and on behalf of our students, staff, families, and community members.
Thank you. Victoria Contreras.
First, I'd like to say hi to everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So I would like to speak on the school board meeting on 9/25. This discussion was mainly around boundaries. And you had a primary criteria for boundaries and you had a secondary criteria for boundaries. I would like to start off by commending the board member who actually brought up the feeder schools that were located in the secondary boundary criteria and spoke about how important that was and then had it moved up into the primary. And I'd also like to commend the other board members that understood that and agreed and moved it on up. So I'm located in off of Silver Glen and Route 31. So my daughter actually went to Wild Rose for her, grade school years. And then from there, she went through to actually where we are right now, Haynes Middle School. And during her years here, they were rebuilding Thompson. So by the end of her stay here, she was taking classes at Thompson as well. And she developed a really good core group of friends during that time. High school hit. You can actually go from my house straight through the subdivision into another subdivision and wind through and hit the light right in front of St. Charles North. So as the crow flies, it's probably a mile away. Well, what happened is she had these friend group over here, went to high school. She's now the little fish in a big school, and all of her friends went to the other high school. She was devastated. Okay, so it was her freshman year, lost all of her majority of her friends because of districting. And it was a very, very hard year for her. And then of course, COVID hit, but that's a whole other story. Now I'm facing a very similar thing with my 10-year-old. He's at Wild Rose, and now I found out he's going to Redling. Where is he going to be going to high school? Is he going to be in the same position again? So again, I'd like to commend you for moving that feeder school back up to where it needs to be as a primary consideration for our students, because we are here for them. What is best for them? And we experienced it when it didn't work out so well. So I really need you guys, to pay attention to that. And again, thank you for moving that up. It means a lot to me and other parents too that had to deal with this. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, we will move on then to our second part of the agenda for discussion and Title I Schoolwide Waiver for Munhall.
All right, so this evening we're going to hear about Title I. We are requesting a waiver for our Munhall to go from a targeted Title I to school-wide. Dr. Tracy Taylor and Zach are going to talk to us a little bit about how those work through. Tell us a little bit about what his plan is for how to use to spend the money to focus through that school-wide process.
Good evening. As Dr. Igo stated, we're here to talk to you a little bit about Munhall's petition for a school-wide waiver to use their Title I funds in a school-wide fashion. So we're going to start over with just an overview of what Title I is, and then I will have Mr. Minnelli talk to you a little about what the plan is for Munhall. So policy alignment, we have board policy and related to the fact that for Title I programs, we are to pursue funding under Title I that really is designed to supplement instructional services and activities in order to improve the educational opportunities of educationally disadvantaged or deprived children. This is in alignment with our strategic plan. Under effective collaboration, we know we need to be responsible and transparent stewards of our taxpayer resources. And as part of the plan process, Mr. Manelli engaged families, the Munhall families and community for the purpose of benefiting students to better understand how can we use these dollars. Instructional coherence wise, this is related to equitable systems of support that are responsive to student needs, accessible to a diverse group of students, and support each student's goals and aspirations. And then, also culture of dignity, ensuring that our policies are equitable, our programs, our infrastructures, in the way that we help promote access, excellence, and accountability for all students. So a little bit about what Title I funding is. Title I are federal dollars that are provided to give additional academic support and learning opportunities to help underperforming children that are living at or below the poverty level, and to help them master challenging curriculum and meet the state standards in our core academic subjects. So in this chart here, you'll see Title I and the funds that we've received over the past 3 years. Starting in fiscal year 22, you can see the initial allocation of roughly $500,000. We've had a decline in dollars received in FY 23 at $418,000. And in this year, we're sitting at currently $355,000. We may receive carryover funds. Those carryover funds usually are told to us around this time of year. But at this point, this is our dollars that we have. So the benefits of a school-wide status, a Title I school-wide waiver allows Title I schools greater flexibility in how we spend the dollars. So it permits all students to be able to participate, permits all teachers and parents to participate, and it allows for the funds to be used to support instruction across the entire building. As a point of reference, we have 4 Title I schools in our district, Anderson, Richmond, Davis, and Munhall. So how the process works is that schools need to have at least 20% of their students be classified as low income. But if you are under the 40% required rate to if you have less than 40% low income students, you need to apply for a waiver to utilize funds in a school-wide fashion. So this year, Munhall reached that threshold and has a low income population of 22%. The process must have board approved statewide school-wide plan. It does not change the amount of money that we receive. It just changes how we're able to allocate the dollars. We must submit the waiver annually if below the 40% threshold. So again, this is the first year that Munhall has reached the threshold of at least 20%. And so that's why we're coming to you to kind of lay out what the plan will be for those dollars. And the waiver must be approved by the school board prior to us submitting to ISB, Illinois State Board of Education. So in that waiver, schools must address the following items: how the school-wide waiver will allow the school to use funds to benefit all students while continuing to provide high-quality instruction and close achievement gaps, and the educational needs of the building to receive school-wide status. How does it benefit students? How is it to the benefit of teachers? I can pause for a question now, or should I continue to have Mr. Manelli go into the plan? Okay, so I will let Mr. Manelli now talk about his plan.
Thank you, Tracy. Good evening, everybody. Zach Manelli, principal at Munhall. I'm just going to talk quickly through our school-wide plan. Just want to thank the members up here. This team came in the summer a couple of times and really worked hard through this plan. Combination of classroom teachers, specialists, teaching assistants, social workers, Munhall parents, and Tracy and Cindy, some district leaders as well. So thank you to everybody up there. Our focus for this year really is the addition of a Title I teacher. Just some key points we think that this Title I teacher can really support our entire building is really supporting that Tier 1 instruction, both in math and ELA, which we think will help reduce the student teacher ratio in our Tier 1 instruction. our focus this year is through those PLC conversations and really supporting teams through our professional learning cycles and a focus on responding to evidence of student learning. So we think this Title I teacher could be a massive support in that area. And kind of in addition to that, just supporting teams with analyzing student data through our diagnostics and also those weekly common quick progress checks that teams are starting to go through the process right now. In addition to that, we were able to use some of this funding for a 0.5 social worker, which has been a huge benefit to our building. Our 0.5 social worker provides direct service minutes to our special education students who need support in both, social, emotional, and behavioral instruction. In addition, they provide really just that tier 1 building, school-wide learning and social and emotional learning to all of our Munhall students. The staff members have been an awesome resource for just our problem-solving teams and really supporting students with the overall goal of promoting school-wide our student success. And then just another staff member to build relationships with our staff, students, parents, guardians, which ultimately supports the implementation of that student's IEP. If we do have some funds available, whether that's this year or for future spending, our team really, when we did our data analysis review, we identified our diverse learners and our social and emotional learning as 2 areas where we really think Munhall could benefit. So when looking at our diverse learners, some examples we thought could support our students are some culturally diverse texts, copies of various books in various languages, decodables and visuals to support math vocabulary building wide. Munhall has an SEL committee this year, which has been an amazing addition to our building. This team really helps plan school-wide themes in regards to SEL, which align with our strategic plan and sense of belonging. This has been an awesome addition in the sense that it has promoted school-wide alignment with our themes, which also translate to morning meetings and town halls, which Dr. Gordon is able to even come by, and we have our whole building in the gym at the same time, hearing the same message. It's like a 20 little minute prep rally where we read a book and just try to build our school-wide community. And then lastly, just some additional books for all of our classrooms, just that can support some of our social and emotional needs, just so kind of like I said, all of our students are hearing that same message.
Excuse me. So as we kind of, I certainly open it up to questions, but I really want to kind of highlight some of those big pieces really around that tier 1 instruction. So the bonus to the school wide is that you get to serve all the students in your school. If we weren't using school wide, we'd have what's called targeted instruction, in which case we're providing support to just kids that we have targeted. And this really leans into kind of our overall strategic plan and our overall focus on core instruction. And we've really aligned the services and supports to allow for that to kind of continue. That's kind of the big picture kind of look, but we'll happily answer any questions that you have.
Is there any programming mandated or tied to these funds? So we get the money and we have to teach. I don't know. Is there any programming tied to it?
So all that it dictates is that it's used to the advancement of students who are underperforming and that are considered lower economic status.
Okay.
And so as we present a plan, there's different categories that we need to make sure that we talk about: how professional learning for staff, instruction, how are we going to engage families? But in terms of a specific program, that's not outlined.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, I just wondered when you hope to get the funds.
So generally carryover funds are given out right around this time of year of October. So we've not heard from ISB yet what funds are left over. But as soon as we find that, then we'll be able to make any changes that we would need to continue to support with those dollars.
All right, any other questions?
I had a few. So I was just curious, first of all, why the Title I funding is declining. Is that a function of the federal budget dollars?
Yes.
Okay. And then is the waiver actually for next year, the 24-25?
It's for this school year.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting, timing wise. And then, I'm sorry.
I thought I pressed it, I'm sorry, right? it's a timing thing. October 1st is federal budget time.
Yeah. And we have 4 schools right now or 3?
We have 4 schools. So the other schools are already currently operating under school-wide. And this is the first year that Munhall has had that percentage of low-income students that allowed them to qualify for school-wide use.
Right. Okay. And then I'm curious, the Title I, is it actually a Title I teacher that is going to have a classroom, or what exactly?
So they're not a classroom teacher, but they are a certified staff member that supports Tier 1 instruction, either like through a co-teaching and co-planning model. Again, as Dr. Idle was saying, to kind of reduce that ratio of students to teachers. And so it's another certified staff member, but they are kind of floating. They are not in a classroom.
Okay. And then I would assume you would determine how that resource is used, right? Okay. And then the last question I had, the social worker, is that a full-time FTE?
0.5. We do have a 1.0 social worker. This one was 0.5.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep, to piggyback off of Mrs. Fairgreave's questions. So in the unfortunate event that these funds in the future are not approved for whatever reason that may be, whether we fall below the qualification threshold or we're denied for whatever reason, what happens to those folks, the staff that we've brought on? You know, my concern would be for them if the funding is lost for whatever reason, even if it's an unlikely event.
So sometimes we're able to find different positions within the district. This year, our staff did go down some. Last year, we were able to have some more 0.5 staff at a couple of our supporting our buildings. But because of the nature of our dollars declining, we were not able to have them back at this time.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I asked the question, you know, given the variability of and volatility sometimes of funding, especially if we lose out on that funding, you know, trying to allocate that accordingly and utilize the funding to keep those staff employed within the district. Is there any other context you can add there? Maybe Dr. Igo?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think, you know, we always have, what happens really is we look to see what certification do those individuals have, and which we place them into. We look to see what open positions we would have so that we can place them in those positions. Generally speaking, we usually have a first grade class, you know, some kind of elementary grade level that becomes available. So what it really does is it just determines we wouldn't necessarily post and hire for another position is typically how that falls. I think too, the thing about Title I dollars is that there's some pretty tight reins around what and how you can use those dollars. And it is really difficult to spend the amount of money that we have without utilizing it for staff, because you can't just use it. And there's just some tight guidelines around how you do that.
So the intent would be that this is intended to be a full-time permanent position moving forward?
We under the Title I, we're required to evaluate every year. So every year we look at our data, we take a look, what's working, what's not, how much money do we have, in which case we then decide and start to move some things around based upon that.
Yeah, because my concern would just be bringing them on board and then heaven forbid we lose the funding and then we have to remove them from their position, which would be unfortunate.
Right. So that's when we would start to kind of that shuffle position, right? Like what positions are they qualified for? What do we have open? We usually can find a place for somebody to go, and what it results in is us not posting and hiring for like a 3rd grade position because they are certified to teach 3rd grade.
Thank you for that.
And this could potentially be impacted, or at least our percentage could potentially be impacted by the redistricting, correct?
100% that could happen.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on now to our multilingual overview.
Yeah, so Dr. Risha is going to come forward and talk to us a little bit about the programming and services and supports for our multilingual learners. I just want to put a little bit of perspective around that. So as you know, we have, you've asked us to really develop a comprehensive plan to support. We will be back next month to do just that, to bring that comprehensive plan. But we wanted to just kind of provide a little bit of background information and some knowledge tonight so that we all had something that we were working from, so that we, again, could then really focus in on how are we going to respond. But unless you understand how we currently have services, it's really hard. We want to just make sure you had that background for the information coming forward.
Okay, like we said, we're here to speak to you this evening about the programming that we have for our multilingual learners. Within our programs, we are very fortunate to have highly knowledgeable and passionate educators servicing our multilingual learners in our district. So I do want to say that the staff and the support that we have, the people on the ground working with our students really is unparalleled. And I think that's important to start the presentation by saying that. So we have 3 outcomes for this presentation. First, we will provide you with background information on how students qualify for multilingual services in general. Just what's that process? We will then explain what services are required per the Illinois School Code. And lastly, we'll explain the various service delivery models available to students currently as it is in D303. The core values of our strategic plan are designed to help us make decisions, and we're focusing on belonging, which helps us honor the dignity of all of the students and the staff and the people that are within our district and validating and appreciating them. With perseverance, we face and overcome our challenges by being determined and resilient. And when we think about achievement, we're working towards establishing high standards and leveraging our talents, times, and resources to produce exceptional work. So certainly this conversation tonight fits very squarely within the strategic plan. So when we think to further guide our conversation or discussion, our presentation will focus on the strategic priority of instructional coherence. When we think about instruction and systems of support, specifically to support our multilingual learners. So sitting in that square box in the middle, we're thinking about how do we ensure a guaranteed and viable curriculum? Are we utilizing evidence-based instructional practices? And what are the equitable systems of the support that we have that are responsive to our students? And certainly, I don't want us to forget that aspects of creating a culture of dignity apply to this as well, making sure that we are promoting excellence and honoring the dignity of each student, staff, and community member. So before we launch into this presentation, I think it's important that we review the timeline of where this presentation fits in the larger work that has been done at the board level regarding multilingual learners. So in August of 2022, the district received the results of an equity audit that was completed by the Consortium for Educational Change in Chapin Hall. The reports at that time indicated an achievement gap along demographics, specifically Hispanic, Black, and African-American students, and those students of low socioeconomic status. Overall, the report found inconsistent rigor and expectations for students across the district. From there, then, an equity committee was formed to review the audit and make recommendations that were then included in the strategic plan. The school board then established goals for the 2020-24 school year, including key deliverables and timelines across multiple areas. Specifically, as it relates to the topic for this evening, goal number 2 in the area of academics, which was to analyze, identify the root causes, and develop an action plan to address underperforming Hispanic and English language student cohorts across D303. So at the September Learning and Teaching Committee, the board reviewed, discussed, and adjusted the committee charge statement, which outlined the work scope and the key questions guiding the audit, and that was presented by Dr. Igo to make sure that we were addressing the questions that the board had and fully representing our work to align with the board goal and the deliverables that were expected. In preparation for the comprehensive plan, which will be presented at the board at the November L&T Committee meeting, we are here tonight, as Dr. Igo said, to provide foundational information on the services for multilingual learners. So you may have noticed the terminology we are using in tonight's presentation utilizes the phrase multilingual learners. And this is intentional. Multilingual learners now refers to students who are formerly referred to as English language learners or ELs. Multilingual learners are defined as students who have with a primary or home language other than English and who are now in the process of acquiring English. And this shift in our terminology is due to more of an assets-based approach, an approach that honors the connection that language has to culture and identity, and it acknowledges the power of speaking with more than one language. You can see such terms as English learner or English language learner emphasize what students are not able to do. It's a deficit approach to looking at students, which can result in potentially lowering our expectations for students. So if we are to create a culture of dignity, our language needs to reflect an assets-based approach. Using the term multilingual learner shifts that focus from an English-only perspective to one that honors the other language or even multiple languages that might be spoken at home by that student. So now that we have the basic understanding of that terminology regarding this group of students, let's start to develop the picture of the multilingual learners that are in our district today. So when we think about the multilingual learners or district, there's a great variability amongst the students as a subgroup, and this next part of the presentation will address some of those differences. So the number of students that are identified as multilingual learners has increased slightly from year to year, with an increase of about 1.7% over the past 5 years. In the school year of 2023, we had 7% of our student population identified as a multilingual learner. The majority of the students that we have who are eligible for services do accept and participate in some form of programming in our district. And approximately 19% of multilingual learners were enrolled in the K-5 dual language one-way program. So to kind of give you additional context or further context, let's look at how many by level. And so that right-hand box there gives you a breakdown of the students who have been identified as multilingual learners. And you can see that the large portion of students are at the pre-K 5 level, so 66%. And then as we get into the upper grades, we see less students, so 16% at grades 6 through 8, and then 17% at grades 9 through 12. And this is in keeping with what is typically expected of the majority of students being at the elementary level and fewer students at the upper levels. So research indicates that it takes about 5 to 7 years for someone to develop academic English proficiency. And so typically what you see is most students at the elementary level are achieving that level of English proficiency at grades the fourth and fifth grade level, which would kind of be in keeping with that by the time they reach middle school, they're no longer designated as a multilingual learner. Our numbers match that research. So our language diversity has increased over time. So currently there are approximately 49 different languages spoken among multilingual learners in the district. Spanish is the most common language. And then I put on the right-hand side there, the top 5 languages spoken by multilingual learners in our district. So they are Gujarati, Polish, Ukrainian, and Russian. And those are listed in the order that they are most commonly seen here in the district. And there has been a slight increase then in the diversity of number of languages over time. And with that, there's been a slight decrease then in the overall percentage of multilingual learners who speak Spanish in the district. So now that we know a little bit about the students who are multilingual learners, it's important to understand then what process or qualifications go into being identified as a multilingual learner. So in this, in the state of Illinois, the process of identifying students is outlined by the Illinois School Code and then is further defined by the Illinois State Board of Education. So you can see that upon enrolling in the district, if any student or family reports that if there's another language other than English that's spoken in the home, the student must be screened for those services. The Illinois School Code identifies both the screeners and the proficiency scores, and that what is outlined in the Illinois School Code is specifically the screeners, and then the Illinois State Board of Education then defines proficiency cut scores for students in terms of their level of English proficiency. Once a student then has been identified as being a multilingual learner through that screening process, annually, you're required to assess that child's language proficiency. So in grades K through 2, the English proficiency levels are assessed using that Access for ELL's assessment. Once a student achieves a composite score of a 4.8 on that Access, by state definition, they are considered English proficient and no longer require services. And I do want to add that the screeners are different at the varying levels. So there's a different screener for our pre-K, our kindergarten, and then grades 1 through 2, that they do look different.
Before you go on.
Yes.
Is the IAR or the SAT offered in any of the 10 languages for which we screen by the state? The state requires that everyone take the SAT, and all the students take the IAR. Are those taken in English or are those taken in home language?
In terms of the IAR, students are able to take the math assessment in Spanish that is available to students in Spanish. They can have native language support like directions, clarifications for the other portions of the assessment. But in terms of taking a Spanish language arts assessment, that's not possible. And then as far as the SAT, I don't believe that that's an accommodation that is available. There are other accommodations that can support them as a multilingual learner, but not necessarily a native language.
Does the code talk about it at all, measuring the proficiency of those students in whatever their home language might be?
It does not.
Thank you.
One of the things that the State Board of Education has talked about at some of the meetings I've been at is developing a Spanish language arts assessment in particular, but that has yet to be developed and released. But that is something that they have had discussions about in order to kind of fully understand the language ability of the students who happen to speak Spanish. But it's not available at this time. So what are some of the requirements for the programming for as outlined in the Illinois School Code, which are specific to some of those programmatic requirements? We'll now discuss those. So school districts must offer programming based on the demographics of the multilingual learners or the MLs at each of their individual schools. So let's look at that box on the left. So transitional bilingual education, or what's called a TBE, focuses on teaching English as a second language, or ESL, and requires that the core academic subjects are to be taught in the student's home language and in English. It's important to note that when we talk about full-time and part-time TBE, it does not refer to the amount of time a student receives instruction. I think it's a little confusing. It actually refers to the amount of instruction delivered in that native instruction. So full-time means I have more classes in native language instruction. Part-time means less classes in native language instruction. So in a full-time TBE program, native language instruction is provided to students in those core subject areas: math, science, social studies, language arts. In a part-time TBE program, students who would benefit from receiving only some components of that full-time TBE program would receive instruction in that native language. So it is largely dependent at that point on kind of students' ability, both in their native language and in English. When we think about what's required, when do we have to offer a TBE? TBE services must be provided when there are 20 or more students from the same language background that are in one building. So not by grade level, it's 20 students who happen to speak that same language. So in the case of Spanish, 20 students who speak Spanish, regardless of grade level, a TBE must be offered. When we look at the box on the right, a transitional program of instruction, or a TPI, focuses on teaching English as a second language, or ESL, and utilizes native language support or instruction to the extent necessary or feasible. We know that native language support for students is important and valuable and does help them, but we're not always able to deliver that depending on the language of the student. But we certainly try to do that. TPA services may be provided when there are 19 or fewer multilingual learners from that same language background. So now we have an overview of kind of the requirements for the programming for the Illinois School Code. So let's shift the discussion to the service delivery models that we have here in D303.
Oh, sorry, how many TBE languages are we offering currently?
So that will be on the
Oh, is
next
that
slide here. Yeah, that's a great segue. Yes. So the service delivery model, I said, at each of the schools in the district varies because the student population at each of the schools does vary. So when we think about transitional bilingual education, or TBE programs, we currently have those offered at EC and 5 of our elementary schools. So Anderson, Davis, Munhall, Richmond, and Norton Creek, and both middle and high schools have TBE programs. And those services are provided in Spanish, and they're flexible and responsive to the student needs. So we have at the EC, or the pre-K classrooms, we have an AM and a PM section that's offered, and instruction is primarily in Spanish and aligns with the EC curriculum. We have push-in and co-teaching supports, which are provided to students across all the levels, K-12. Students then are in a general education classroom setting, and they're provided with Spanish language instruction and supports as needed. So a bilingual teacher would be coming in and working with those students within that general education classroom setting. When we get to the middle school level, still staying in the language of Spanish, we continue to have those push-in and co-teaching supports, as we talked about at the elementary level. And in addition to that, we have a bilingual social studies course, which is available at Thompson Middle School. And instruction is on the core grade level standards and is taught in Spanish. We also have an EL resource at the high school, which is providing support with content area classes in Spanish as needed for those students. Going back up to the top, thinking about another type of service delivery model still within TBE. We have the dual language one-way program, which is offered at Davis and Richmond. This supports students in becoming biliterate and bilingual. This dual meaning instruction is provided in 2 languages, the native language, which is Spanish, and English, and one way, meaning that all students enrolled are from the same single native language background, so Spanish. And of the available types of bilingual program models, dual language programs, whether they're one way, like the one we have here, or 2-way, which we don't have, are the only models that lead to bilingualism and biliteracy and have the strongest rates of English proficiency development. So when we think about programs within the bilingual model, the dual language model is the one that leads to the best outcomes for students. And then we do have, outside of Spanish, Gujarati. We have a TBE program for Gujarati speaking students at Norton Creek. So we reached that threshold of having 20 or more students who speak Gujarati. Students are currently being offered after school supports from a Gujarati teacher. We have unfortunately been unable to hire a Gujarati endorsed teacher to fill in the capacity of supporting students during the school day. And so we are trying to accommodate their language needs by providing that after school tutoring.
Does that option fulfill the requirement?
It does. We have to have our due diligence of continuing to search and look for an appropriately endorsed teacher. And we've reached out and worked with Marcy on that, as well as reached out to other organizations that as well. And I've been in lots of conversations with our Illinois State Board of Education consultant as it relates to multilingual learners. And she understands the challenge that we are faced with fulfilling that.
But just to clarify, so that would indicate that at Norton Creek, we do have 20 or more students with this multi-language.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And
can I-
And are all 20 students taking advantage of the after school?
They are not.
They're not. Okay.
Can I follow that up with how many are?
That I don't know. I mean, they were just getting it started right after the school, and they were doing some efforts to really recruit students. So I know that was a very small number, but I can certainly follow up and get a specific number at this point.
But to be clear, we have to be offering this, no
Yes.
matter the number of students participating or choosing to participate or not. It is a requirement that we are offering that at this time in lieu of a more traditional transitional bilingual education program.
Correct.
Yeah, and I guess, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say a comment. I would hope as we dig into how many students are participating and all of that. I don't know how well it's been communicated. I would suspect there could be a gap there with the families. And so, I would hope we're looking into that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And do we provide transportation?
We do not.
Is that something that would help?
I'm uncertain about that question. I know that Norton Creek in general, many of the families that is,
Can walk,
yeah,
but at 4:30 at night, maybe
yes.
there's a change.
That's a good point.
So the existence of this program doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a learning gap, just simply that we are beyond the threshold of those 20 students. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So by the school code, we've reached that threshold of having those 20 students. And so we need to offer those native language supports. And there's great variability within that. So even the students that might, be qualified for that, their level of Gujarati language could be widely different in terms of I have some conversational Gujarati that I speak at home to I'm very fluent and I can read and write in Gujarati and everything in between. And so that's one of the kind of the variables when we think about the other language or languages that a student might have, that they're not all equal and might need to be serviced differently.
And on that note, that's something that I written down as one of my questions. In the past, I've experienced students who simply because they spoke another language at home, it was not even the primary language, was not a language that even was spoken much at home. It was just, yes, the rest of my family knows whatever language, Spanish, whatever. Those students, would they be part of the 20 meeting the threshold?
Correct.
And so there's no follow-up there to determine actual necessity.
So can I
Please. I just wanted to clarify though, for a student to be identified as such, they have to go through the screener. And they have to have whatever proficiency score. So I guess to your point, they may only speak whatever language at home, but they still have to, the data still has to support it with the screener and their score.
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, what I'm saying is that then when we get to this 20, these are these are students who, after the screening, we've met that threshold of 20 who are in need of the services. It's not simply 20 people who speak some other language at home.
Right. So they've identified through the enrollment process that there's another language spoken at home, either by the child or by the parent or a family member within that household. And then we screen that child for their English language proficiency using one of those screeners. And then based on their score, and if they, meet or don't meet that proficiency score, they're eligible for services.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Is that screener the same access test that you referenced on slide 11?
It's aligned to that. It's created by, let me take this back. So kindergarten through 12th grade, the screener is created by WIDA. WIDA is a consortium, world-class instructional design and assessment. They are the creators of the framework or the language proficiency scale that is utilized both on the screener and on the access test. So they align, but they're not the same.
Okay.
So they use the same scale score. They use the same framework of English language proficiency. They assess the same language domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The test itself is set up the screener is set up very similar. It's like Access Lite. And then the pre-K one is a completely different assessment, much more developmentally appropriate for our early learners. Okay. And so then we move to the transitional program of instruction. We have those offered at Anderson, early childhood, Anderson, Belgraham, Coron, Davis, Pearson Creek, Munhall, Norton Creek, Richmond, and Wild Rose. And what that looks like in practice is really instruction in English with native language instruction supports where it's possible. We said that if it's possible, if we're able to do that, if we're able to find those resources, or the student has that level of language proficiency in their native language, we really try to support them where we can with that. So at the EC pre-K classrooms, all of their classroom teachers are supporting students during their core instruction, as all of the teachers in that program have or are working on their ESL endorsement. So that's really embedded throughout the day, supporting their learners in their classroom. We have push-in and co-teaching supports that are continuing to be provided to students across all levels K-12. So again, this would be an ESL or EL endorsed teacher working to support those students with English and native language instruction as needed. Additionally, so when we think about then going to the middle school and high school level, we continue to have those push-in and co-teaching supports. We recently started offering an English language development course or an ELD course for our newcomers at the middle school. So this happens in the Explore class. This is in addition to their core language arts instruction. So trying to get them some additional support with their English language development. And at the high school level, we have EL courses 1 through 4, which are leveled instructional classes based on the level of proficiency of English of those students. And it's working on developing the skills necessary for them to access mainstream courses. And it does allow them to earn their required English credits for graduation. That EL Lit block serves as like an extra dose. So they can have that as like an add-on half period to their day if that's like additional supports that we feel are needed. And then continue to have that EL resource with that time where they can come in and get support with their core content area materials from an ESL or a bilingual endorsed teacher. And one of the things that we do want to mention and kind of like to close this part out is that we do not offer services at Lincoln and Wasco. And this has been due to low student numbers at those particular buildings. But we do offer those families the option of having their child receive services at another school. So Lincoln students are able to attend Munhall for those services and Wasco students are able to go to Belgraham for those services if the family chooses to accept them.
Quick clarification question.
Yeah.
So looks like there's about 4 or 5 of the pre-K to 5 that are under the TPI program, but not the TBE. Do we know how close we are to that threshold, that 20 threshold for those other institutions that may then be moving from, the TPI services to the required TBE services?
Yes, so I pulled those numbers up if you give me. So as I have it, like currently the students that are in attendance, obviously Spanish is one of those languages that we would be looking at. There's not a school that looks like they would be close to that. Most of them are 15 to 13 in their numbers, but certainly should our boundaries change, that would be something that we would have to take a look at, because that could potentially then shift and make that change in terms of getting that 20. But we don't have anything in terms of one of our other languages that we would have enough students like the Polish or the Ukrainian, that those students are spread across grade levels, across different buildings in the district. So Spanish is the one that I would be looking at most closely, and I don't see another building at this time.
And the reason I ask is because, as we take the feedback from RSP, and we may have some unforeseen consequences to changing those allocations of students, where especially if we're really close at 18, 19 or something, then it's 1 or 2 students that move us over that threshold. So maybe as a board, we can take a closer look at that and see how that might be, how that might impact the necessity to offer these programs, and then the corresponding staffing challenges that we might have.
Sure. And I think what's probably important to point out is with Spanish, when students come in, we do take a look to determine whether they'd be appropriate for our dual language program. So if they come in and they move in, like, because anybody across anywhere in the district may go to Richmond Davis to access that. So that helps to keep some of those numbers kind of under that 20. And it helps also as we make decisions, because we have an option and a parent can refuse that option. And then it looks a little bit different when we do that, like how we provide those services and supports in place. But not every student that moves in that speaks Spanish is appropriate for a dual language. So if they haven't been a part of a dual language program in a previous district and they're in 5th grade, we certainly wouldn't enroll them in the dual language program, right? Like, because they wouldn't have had that access or experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Really, I'm glad that because that's I had a follow-up question to that. So in those situations where we give students that are not in the Richmond Davis boundary to go there, do we pay for transportation for them, or how do they?
We can.
So if they're outside of Richmond Davis and
yes,
they
we would
are a
offer them
candidate.
transportation.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we know how many students we do that for today
We
that
do.
are outside of Richmond Davis boundary?
Yes.
I know
It's
that
like
the percentage of students, but I don't know like transportation wise what that would equate to.
Well, or even
but
just
the numbers.
number
It's like,
that come in.
It was like over 40, it was over almost 50%, I thought
yeah,
Jared said.
right. It's
previous
Anderson
meeting.
is like what, at 20%.
21% for
21%.
Anderson.
Yep. And then Wild Rose is at like 16.
Correct. Good memory.
I know, I tried.
And
Anderson,
what are
Wild
they saying those
Rose.
represent? What do those percentages represent?
How many
Student-
people travel outside the boundary?
So they live outside Davis Richmond, but they attend Davis
Percentage of the
Richmond.
students at Davis Richmond who are not.
That do not
are
attend, that are not,
in that boundary.
that are not in
Right.
the attendance
And
boundary.
receive transportation services from the district.
I think, as I recall, Wild Rose was
And Munhall's-
18%.
Wild Rose is 16. Mhm. Then the next one I think is Munhall at
Munhall
8%.
8%.
So gives you an idea of how many students we have. But you should also keep in mind like the ends, because it's 184 total students.
In dual language.
Yes. So it's a small number. Like 8% is like 15 students.
Mhm.
Do we receive any state funding for languages at all? Is there any grants or anything? What does that look like for us?
So we receive title, since we're talking about title grants, let's talk about Title III. So Title III are federal dollars that we receive specifically to support multilingual learners. It is intended to be a supplemental support. So in terms of, we have an obligation to provide core instruction, following the school code, providing those core instructional models. And then the Title III dollars are meant to supplement or add on. So typically when they're looking for you to spend those dollars, like, are you doing something after school, before school? Are you doing something in the summer? How are you adding on to something that you already have to provide as a core? I will say that the allocation for that works out to be approximately $100 per student. So how that funding source works out is the state gets the pool of money from the federal government, and then they figure out like how many multilingual learners do we have? How does that work out? And then we can then divide that out amongst the districts based on the number of multilingual learners they have.
Are we at the bottom of the list for that funding, like we are for all the other state funding, or does that get doled out?
It's per student, so it's based
Not
on like,
related to evidence-based funding per
Got it.
se, like doesn't put us into a tier. It's
if you have
get-
900 students, you get 900
based on the
times
students you have.
$100 per student, and then that's the money that you get. I will say that at the recent bilingual directors meeting, that while then across the state, the number of multilingual learners has done this and the federal dollars has done this, that $100 is not necessarily going to be the guaranteed amount that we continue to get moving forward. So they do revisit that annually based on the pool of money that they get. So I think that's just a point of transparency of that's not a guaranteed. There are additional funding also through immigrant education grant, so that we can get dollars specifically to support newcomer students or students who are newly arrived in the country. They define a new immigrant education as any student that's been born outside of the United States and has entered US schools for the first time within 3 years. So they count towards that funding source. Year 1, 2, and 3, first time being enrolled in US schools. There's a little more kind of like, you don't automatically qualify based on the numbers. You have to have shown that you've had like so much of an increase over time to qualify for that. Last school year was the first time that we've qualified for those fundings in a really long time. Like when I first started here 12 years ago, we did have that as a funding source, and then we've not qualified for that for several years. And then last year was the first time that because we've gotten quite a bit of newly enrolled students, we've qualified for those fundings for the first time in a while.
I think it's also important not to get too much into the funding, but within our like state funding that we get, we used to get so much money as it was per student that qualified for our multilingual services. That money has been then rolled into kind of the total funds that we get, but we are still responsible for spending the same amount of money we did prior to evidence-based funding. So there is some state funding. It's just a little bit more complicated. But we do get some state funding, and then we have to be careful that we are not underscoring that funding over time.
From a budget perspective, are we breaking that out right now, or is it just going in the general fund right now?
I mean, from the big picture, the board would see it within the different funds.
Okay.
But really, when it comes down, because it is such a small, quite honestly, in the grand scale of things, it's a pretty small amount of dollars. But Dr. Roosh is responsible for ensuring that those dollars are allocated in the manner in which they were intended to do. But as the board sees them, you'll see them in their Fund 10, you'll see them in the larger funds.
Got it.
But again, they're pretty small in the grand scheme of things.
Just a suggestion, especially as we're moving forward and evolving, it might be a good idea to footnote somewhere how much of the fund is, allocated for
By these, federal dollars and what they're allocated for and the percentages.
Yeah.
I'll have Justin do that.
Yeah, the spend for
I'll
multilingual.
ask Justin.
Yep.
Okay.
When we have students that move in from a new country, seeing we have 49, which I think personally is impressive, because I only speak 1.5 languages. To think that our staff has been taking all of that on. What is the process when there's a new language that we haven't as a district experienced?
And to clarify, like in terms of the process that the teacher would go through?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, if our district staff hasn't had that experience yet, or doesn't know how, what would be the process, just out of curiosity?
So I think that there's the great benefit, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that we have tremendous teachers, and they are advocates and they are passionate, and they also network and work with one another. And so in terms of, we're utilizing iPads so that kids have they have Google Lens and they're translating, and we have kids that are translating in Ukrainian and in Arabic, and we're utilizing the technology built in with some of our school system, like school platforms, like within Schoolwide. There's a app extension. I want to get the right terminology, called Immersive Reader. So within that immersive reader, you can capture something that's in English, and then there's like a whole list of languages that can then be translated to, both in text and also then can be read aloud to students in their native language. We are also fortunate that with some of the resources that we recently adopted to support our students specifically at the middle school level for literacy, there are resources and supports specifically targeted to supporting multilingual learners, and there's some native language supports in some languages. They reach out to community members. I know we had a story of one of our teachers supporting multilingual learners, and she found a community member that spoke that language and brought them in and helped to clarify and support. So I know that in my own experience, having some of our families come in, they're bringing family members to help kind of navigate and kind of let us know what might be some of those appropriate supports. So we really try to do whatever we can to really figure out, wrap our arms around both culturally what's happening, social emotionally what's happening, because that's a larger piece too. It's not just the language component. When we think about some of our students who are coming here from the Ukraine, there's other things that are layered into that, or our students who are coming here from Colombia, having walked here. And all the trauma and experiences that goes along with that. And so they are very attuned to that. And we try to leverage community resources as much as we can to support those things. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You did above and beyond. Thank you. That's it's impressive. And I don't even think that word is enough. I know that we have amazing staff. Hearing that they're reaching out to community members, I knew there had to be a lot more than they're going, okay, Google Translate. I'm not walking that. So I wanted to hear a little bit about it. My only experience is that was when my kids were at Fox Ridge and a family moved in from Hungary, and this teacher knows who they are. They still work in the district and did a spectacular job figuring out, and this was way before Google Translate, figuring out Hungarian, and watching that process was really fascinating. And now knowing that we have 49 languages, that's incredible. So that's impressive. I know we have great teachers here, but wow, awesome. Thank you.
Hopefully they're listening so they can take that on. They truly are a group of teachers that go above and beyond for their students. And not that all of our teachers don't, but in a special way.
So back on slide 8, you mentioned 7%, and in your prep memo, that's 938 students. What percentage of students earn the proficient score each year on the access test, that 4.8? Out of our 7% or the 938?
Yes.
How many earn that score?
I put that data together for you in the student achievement report.
So we have that coming in the student achievement report, which in November, and we'll talk specifically when we come back in November with the plan about here's what has happening with our access scores. Here's how that lays out in IAR. And therefore, here are our suggestions for moving forward.
But I can tell you the number from last year was 100.
100 out of the roughly 900.
800 something students, because preschool students don't take the access test, and you have kids who don't take it for a variety of reasons. They moved in after the testing in January. So I think it was a little over 12%, almost 13% of students that we had last year that achieved that proficiency scale. I can tell you that of that group, 48 of them were fourth graders. So we definitely saw like big scores. And I can tell you the state average last year for exiting proficiency was 5.8. So we had nearly double the exit proficiency rate than the state.
I understand folks come, whenever their kids are going to slot into whichever grade. I wonder as we look at that, what the duration of time within D303 on average is required in order to achieve that 4.8 of the students that do achieve it. So as we look at that, it'd be valuable to understand how many years in D303 are required in order to meet that, achieve that 4.8.
That is definitely part of the research we've been doing for the comprehensive piece. So yeah, we've been definitely wanting to have that and have pulled the data and have been reviewing that.
And just more of a technical and budget related question. Once those students achieve that 4.8, if I read your documents rightly, they're no longer eligible for state funding. If they remain participants in the Richmond Davis program, but they have achieved that 4.8, well, how does that affect the budget? I can imagine transportation change implications. I can imagine other resource change implications. I'd like to better understand the funding implications of that achievement.
Sure.
You mentioned this briefly, but is it possible to talk about, not tonight, but somewhere along the line, about how we can be sure that in order to be biliterate, how do we assess that second language, not, or the first language? And you said the state doesn't have a Spanish language arts assessment.
That's been part of our process, and we do have something that we do to make sure that students are learning their skills. They're becoming literate in both Spanish and English. And we continue to look for something that's does the job as well as we would like it to do. But that's certainly a component of the dual language program.
I think that's an important piece people have to recognize is we want them to be proficient biliterate. So both languages. Thank you.
Just one more quick question here. Transience is an issue as well. At least I know it was in the past where there were people that were here for only a brief time. They were here for a year, maybe two. And how are we addressing that? Because I know there's not much we can do with somebody in a year or two, and they're gonna, if you have a kind of a constant turnover, do we still have that same kind of an issue?
In terms of like the mobility rate of students?
So yeah, students, they're here they may speak of another language. They're here for a year or two. They move out, somebody else moves in. And so now we've got kind of a constant, what percentage of our students kind of fall in that where they're only here for a brief period of time?
I think we had that as one of our
Yes,
questions.
we'll address that at our next, when we
Yeah.
come back. That was definitely some of the pieces of data. If you go back and look at that charge statement that we asked was what is that? What does that look like?
Well, that just I know it makes it a more difficult prospect for what you're doing.
Sure. I think that might have fallen under like attendance. We had a question specifically about attendance. So I think that would fall under that category, most definitely. Okay. So then next steps, we'll go back to that timeline. We're going to come back. And like I said, we've got the charge statement very specifically with those questions and the research and the information that we've done, and going to come back to you at the November 27th Learning and Teaching with that plan as directed by the board goal. And just there again to remind you, November 27th, that's the date. Any other questions?
Thank you. This
was very good. Thank you.
Yeah,
Nice job.
it's helpful you're scaffolding our work so that when we see the presentation next month, this has helped a great deal. So thank you very much. I assume you're staying right where you are.
We're going to continue on with our conversation about multilingual learners. Okay. So we are going to kind of transition. We've talked a lot about programming, and this fits nicely into that. So we're looking at grades 6 through 8 Spanish language arts, or SLA. Gosh, we gave you lots of different acronyms, so hopefully we've scaffolded that for you. Talking about the vision we have for Spanish language arts and the course approval to be able to offer a course that addresses those language arts standards and the vision that we've outlined. So specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about the information on the SLA, or the Spanish Language Arts CAI Committee. This should look very familiar, having gone through the Math Vision committee presentation just recently. We're going to explain the why and outline the process that we stepped through with that group of educators. We're going to share that Spanish Language Arts vision that we've created for D303. We're then going to provide you information on that grade 6 through 8 Spanish Language Arts course, which is a description of that course. Who are the students that are going to be serviced in that course, and the timeline for the implementation of that course will be discussed as well. And then ultimately, we are asking we are recommending the school board approve the grade 6 through 8 Spanish language arts course to be offered to our students. So again, falling into our strategic plan, again, thinking about belonging, perseverance, and ultimately academic achievement when we're talking about putting programming in place that will lead to high achievement levels. That most definitely is what we're talking about this evening with this course. Again, fitting into the strategic outcomes, both very similarly, again, that structural coherence, and still also sitting very much in that culture of dignity and thinking about how do we have those equitable policies, programs, system structures that provide excellence for all of our students in a way that honors their dignity. So thinking about how we built that vision. So again, we're continuing on with the CA process that we have here established in the district. So we're sitting very squarely up in that planning process. So on the right-hand side, looking at envisioning, so that developing a vision, setting that core set of beliefs that's going to define what instructional excellence means for us, and what that looks like in the classroom, and how do we implement instruction and learning within that content area, in this case, Spanish language arts. So why? So this is about continuing to increase our opportunities for our multilingual learners. Research supports that the extension of a dual language programming beyond the elementary school is beneficial to students. The research would tell you that typically, again, takes students 5 to 7 years to develop that academic proficiency within a dual language one-way program. It typically takes students a little bit longer to develop that academic language proficiency. So we want to continue to support them during their middle school years. It also allows us to fulfill the requirement to teach the new Illinois Spanish language arts standards that were adopted. Again, to go back to the theme of our wonderful educators, so excited about the team that we were able to bring together to do this work. And you can see that we have representation from both of their middle schools, as well as the district level, and then bringing in a teacher that could represent the elementary level, having a teacher having worked in the dual language program and working at Davis and Richmond. And so this really started in the summer of 2023, where we had 2 full days devoted to this work. So the process that we step through, as we do with all of our CAA process, starts with that learning. So we started with learning on evidence-based practices, specifically for developing biliteracy and bilingualism. And I know this is a Spanish language arts class, but it's important when we're talking about instruction for students that we're using that to connect it to English, and that it's a pathway for students to become biliterate and bilingual, not just learn Spanish. We reviewed the goals of the K-5 dual language program. So we had a full understanding of where the students were coming from and where we wanted to move them through in middle school. We took a look at the grades 6 through 8 English language arts vision. So that work had already been done, and the work of the English language arts absolutely mirrors and parallels what we would be doing in Spanish language arts. So we took a look at what that group did. And so literacy expectations in English or literacy expectations that we would have in Spanish as well as some other documents that we took a look at that helped to influence and guide our understanding of bilingualism and biliteracy that helped us to collaboratively develop that vision. So what you have here is, again, structured very similar to the math vision, where we talked about what do we believe? What's our vision for instruction when we think about what's happening in those classrooms, and what are those guiding principles that we're going to lead into when we think about offering high quality instruction or high quality learning in a Spanish language arts classroom. So very similar in terms of what you probably would have seen with the English language arts one, but this looks different in that we're really talking about here, how do we intentionally utilize that home language of Spanish to support and connect to English language development, because we want both of them to be developed. We understand that within classrooms such as this, or within a dual language setting or a Spanish language arts setting, that culture is connected to language, that's a part of the students who are coming to that classroom, their heritage, their family, their identity. And that's important to be able to factor into your instruction and the type of resources and learning experiences that you might have for those students that are engaging with that work.
Pardon me for interrupting you.
Yes.
In the first column under beliefs, you have this statement about strategic intent to utilize the home language to support English language development. Earlier, we talked a little bit about IAR and SAT being English only for language arts related. I have 2 questions for you. I'm going to ask them, then I'm going to have to leave. So
okay.
I'm kind of asking them for the record, but
okay.
The 2 questions are this. What percentage of participants do we expect in a course like this to be Spanish language speakers as native speakers versus English language, given that we have both groups represented in our dual language program? And when I look at that particular outcome, I think about the positive implication of a program like this on those gateway tests. And so I'm thinking about this program and wondering about the efficacy for, in this case, Spanish language speakers who are learning English, and how much and how far that bullet point under your beliefs is realized through a program like this.
So I think I think two things, we hadn't really gotten to the course yet, but what we'll find is that it doesn't replace their English language arts. So it's, they'll take both classes together, which is where that's the intentionality of kind of bridging each of those pieces. Is that the question you're asking me?
No, the question is, how much does that bullet point of English efficacy driven from the co-teaching of English and Spanish language courses at the same time drive for native Spanish speakers? So how much does this course or the presence of this course increase English proficiency for Spanish speakers? That's how I read the
Gotcha.
bullet. And so that's the
Got it.
question.
That makes more sense to me. Thank you for repeating that. I think what the research would tell us is that it significantly improves their ability to access and read and do well on those English language arts tests.
And that would be anchored in that the research that's in the higher levels of proficiency that you have in your first or your native language, the more readily you're able to transfer your knowledge from that language and have similar to levels and then the next language that you're trying to learn.
It would be valuable for me, since I'll miss the rest of this and have to watch it, for you to share whatever those research references are that are footnoted in your memo, the multiple studies.
Okay.
I'd love to see those. Thanks.
Okay.
And so again, you had a copy of the overall vision. So what we gave you on that slide was just kind of like the highlight of kind of what was covered in there in terms of our beliefs, our vision, and the guiding principles, but you do have a copy of that to kind of review more in depth. So moving towards that course description. And this really, again, mirrors what you would see in an English language arts course, but made and adjusted to be appropriate for Spanish language arts. So we are working on developing students' prior knowledge, grammar, vocabulary, word usage, mechanics of writing. We're working in all 4 language domains: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The thing that would be different within here is that we're really using authentic Spanish literature. So that really is important, that we're providing opportunities for students to engage with texts in Spanish that come from a wide variety of cultural backgrounds, countries, different types of Spanish that they're engaging with that's authentic to Spanish literature. And really that, again, that cross-linguistic component, which is so important if we are to develop bilingualism, biliteracy, that we are using language, Spanish language, and connecting that to English and helping kids to navigate and understand the similarities and the differences between those 2 languages. So again, we're continuing to develop that, thinking about that this would replace what's currently offered for students in the Explore Wheel, which is the Spanish for Heritage Speakers, which really is a world language course offering. It's not a true Spanish language arts course. It really falls within like a world or foreign language domain. And this would better serve the students that we have and would again, go back to really working towards helping them to achieve those high levels of academic Spanish. As Dr. Igo mentioned, it does not replace the grade level English language arts course. They're going to be in with that grade level English language arts course, but then they'll have the opportunity to take that Spanish language arts course during their Explore Wheel as an elective opportunity. And again, replacing that heritage class that we're currently offered with something that is more aligned to the students that we have in our district. And then so that would be appropriate for our students that are coming from our K-5, dual language program to continue their biliteracy development enrichment. Certainly we do get kids that move in from other districts, and that is a question of we have neighboring school districts that have 2-way dual language programs. They move into our district. This would be appropriate for those students too, because they've had that learning and background and could go into that class and continue with developing their biliteracy here in the district. And absolutely our newcomers that are coming in from those countries that we mentioned in the earlier presentation. This absolutely helps them, provide them with access and continuing to develop their native language literacy, which is going to help them to better access English. So in terms of when the timeline, we're looking to offer the 6th grade class in the fall of 2024, 2025, and then it would be a roll up each year, right? So that the students in 6th grade, they'll move up to 7th grade and 8th grade, just because it is a difference in terms of the course offering, in terms of content, material, resources, expectations for the learning. So we couldn't necessarily slide all students in there at a 7th and 8th grade level and have them be successful in there. And so thinking about that roll up, continuing to get students in there and moving then phasing out that heritage class at the middle school level. So thinking about our next steps, we'll work with sharing the vision with the teachers and staff across the district. We'll continue to work with the senior director of instruction to kind of make sure that we are in alignment as we go through that CAI process. We're going to bring that committee back together in November, and we're going to begin reviewing resources. We've already established a rubric, very much in alignment with the 6-8 ELA rubric. So again, trying to keep parallel with English language arts as much as we can. We know that that's important. And so it will look very similar, but we'll have a Spanish language arts lens to it, just as you've seen with the vision. And then we'll be coming back to you in January to share, an update on that resource review, how that's going. Field testing those resources materials then in the winter. And then bringing back to you in March of 2024, a resource for your approval to support the instruction in that course. And then using that vision, of course, as we work through our PLCs and any future CA processes to make sure that when we're making decisions, it's really aligned to achieving the vision that the team has set forth for the Spanish language arts standards.
So just to kind of pull another kind of next step in the real next step will be the next immediate step, I should say, will be that this will be brought to the board in November for approval. So the approval of the Spanish language arts course will be approved. Once the board approves that, then we would move into kind of those next steps that we put it in there.
Correct.
I have a question. I like the course conceptually. I am interested though in how this connects to the high school offerings, and have we looked at that?
Yes.
Okay.
So, yes. So one of the things we talked, one of the documents or set of documents that the team worked through was looking at the expectations for AP Spanish language arts and culture and AP Spanish literacy as well. So they looked at with those courses, that's our end game, that's the goal. And so how do we take a look at what the standards are saying that we have to teach students, and then knowing that this is where we want to get students, they did look at the expectations and the language demands within that and that helped to shape that as well.
So have we actually though, have we documented a track? So I see the front end where you talked about K-5, and then they could go into the 6-8 course. So have we tracked then though, what would be a typical high school path for a student that has gone through all of this?
So yes, so they would go 6th, 7th, 8th, and then it would be expectation their 9th grade year that they would take AP Spanish language and culture, and then they would take AP Spanish literature.
Okay.
And then after that, that gets exciting.
Okay. So they would take another language at their junior year?
I think we would have to explore how could we support students with continuing their language.
But that would be new AP classes in freshman year, right? Which is what we've been after.
It would definitely open up options
Right.
at freshman year. You are correct.
So currently the heritage pathway that we have is Heritage 1, Heritage 2, then they go into AP Spanish language and culture, and then AP Spanish literature. So that pathway somewhat already exists. And so we're really at the middle school level, clearly defining it and getting them ready for high school.
We're kind of putting a better pathway in place so that they're better able to engage in the coursework. Of the AP coursework.
So I guess I would just go back for me. I would like to see what that path looks like. Once they come into high school, I understand the 2 AP courses, but after that, what do they do? And the answer could be that that's an opportunity for them to take another language. I would leave that to you all, but I think even for our families, that needs to be mapped out to understand. And then my other question that I had was, what are the Spanish language art standards?
They are actually linked into the report that we sent.
Okay.
So
there's
you
a
can
link.
click into them. They look very similar to the English language arts standards. They just have a few, I believe they're in blue, like when there's some kind of difference or change.
Very much when the state developed them, they were based on the Illinois standards for English language arts. And then they did kind of look at what's different. There are things that are different in Spanish than in English. And so that's included in there as well.
And when do we have to implement those by?
So those were adopted in the fall of 2021.
Okay. So does that mean we're out of compliance? Okay. Thank you.
It's a good knock.
That's a good, and I will say that this process, we had started this earlier and had to put a pause on the project due to some unforeseen circumstances. And so excited that we got back to it and that we had the right staff at the table. And I will say that they are very, very excited about this opportunity and to meet the needs of our students and really to promote that high level of academic Spanish for our students. That's very exciting.
Did we have to apply for a waiver or anything like that because we were out of compliance with it, or it was just?
We did not. It just hasn't been achieved.
When the ROE comes in and does a compliance report, they'll let us know that we were out of compliance. Or I think they did less.
And in fact, we were trying to do things for our students within the heritage class, and that just wasn't the right, wasn't robust. It wasn't the right fit for all of the students that we were trying to service.
One last quick question here, and I'm sorry if I missed that. So starting 24-25, any existing 7th and 8th graders would remain in the heritage class, right? And then we would ultimately sunset that class after that 2-year period, since the other students would be in the new cohort. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So for right now, I want to make sure I heard correctly. Right now, a freshman going in could take an AP Spanish, use of language and culture, and then sophomore year, they could take
AP Spanish.
AP Spanish Lit. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I was trying to make sure. So as of right now, we have a freshman and sophomore class. We don't have junior, senior, correct?
We currently,
There are options. I know there are options. We don't have a clear path at this moment. We just have it for freshman and sophomore, right? So we're not, they're not coming to freshman year without an option, right?
I'm not sure I understand that.
I think
question.
that's
you're
what
right.
Heidi
You're
was
right.
asking was what happens after the sophomore year. My assumption is also that students could take another language in their freshman year if they were going in that direction, right? Or can you only? Yeah.
Well, they can always do that. I guess what I'm just looking to solve for is there going to be a point where a student hits a ceiling, if you will, and there is no more opportunities related to Spanish, but yet they've got 2 more years of school.
Mhm.
And if that's the case, it just needs to be communicated.
Yeah, I think what's important to
That's-
realize is by the time students finish those 2 AP courses, they're set up nicely to apply for and probably pass the seal of biliteracy.
Yeah.
Right, which is the end goal,
Right.
right? So, and they are required under high school graduation, 2 years of will be required in the next, in 26, I can't even remember, 26, 27, 27, 28 for 2 years. So we're meeting those pieces. They'll be eligible to take probably take and pass the seal of biliteracy. Let me try that again. But again, that doesn't mean we don't want options for students, right? Like they might want to look into another language. That would be certainly, we would open that up for them as well. But what we'll do before when we come back in November, just to be clear, is we'll have that pathway really clearly laid out when you can start taking that seal of biliteracy. And then, if they're in a place to earn the seal of biliteracy, I'm not sure another Spanish class is the best option, but we certainly would want to encourage them to continue to build their language skills.
So one student that I'm aware of that reached that ceiling, so to speak, because they moved into the district with extensive background from a different school, they were able to utilize, I think Becky said ECC, and they were able to take Spanish that way also after they had taken both of those AP classes. I know there are options, but I think it'd be great to be able to show something else for junior and senior year if they don't go the ECC route. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
So this would go on to consent. Is that correct? Or should it be an action?
Well, based on the follow-ups that
think
Dr.
for
Iden said, it
action,
would be
yeah.
action.
Because
Okay.
we need to provide you with a little bit more information that you
Okay,
asked for.
so when you say November, you're bringing it back to L&T in November?
I'm bringing it to the
Board.
meeting, but it should be an item for action, not
Got
in
it.
consent.
And just to go back to the Munhall Title I, can that go on consent?
Yeah, you did not ask for any further information, so we won't be bringing any additional information forward.
All right. Any other
Question?
questions?
Nicely done.
Thank you, Dr. Roosh.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
We'll move to our 2D high school course recommendations, and I assume
I'd like to invite We got Staub and Dr. Audra Christensen to the table. They're going to talk a little bit about our course offerings, classes in which we'd like to add for the upcoming school year and classes with which we would like to sunset, as Dr. Christensen likes to say. So they're going to talk with us a little bit about that. I, again, want to put the work a little bit in context that when we came in the L&T in September, we had a charge statement as it related to high school experience. And this is the first step about what are we going to do or change next school year. But the springtime is when we'll come back and really have a conversation about different paths and pathways and what do those look like. So that information is not something we're just sharing this evening because we are up to our elbows in it, honestly, as we continue to work through it. But this is really just, these are things that we can quickly, and part of those deliverables are what can we quickly and easily do to improve the experience for students. And that's what we're focusing on today.
Thank you. Done. No. Thank you for taking the time to hear about some course recommendations that we'd like to bring forth with respect to our high school offerings. Our outcomes for today, we want to refine those high school course offerings in accordance with student participation and also the strategic plan. Provide some course recommendations aligned to evidence-based practices for a high-quality AP program. And then do our due diligence in bringing back a report on the AP honor roll status for you, which has now been released and available from College Board. Grounding our work, we're situated well in instructional coherence in this conversation as we talk about advancing core grade level and beyond instruction. More specifically, all three of those outcomes and instructional coherence really fit nicely. So we're looking at guaranteed and viable curriculum as we look at being consistent at both of our high schools. Also looking at evidence-based instructional practices, looking at that grade level and beyond learning activities again, equitable systems of support as well as we make all of this accessible to a diverse group of students in our schools, supporting those individual student goals and aspirations that they have through our offerings, and also in the culture of dignity, just promoting access, promoting excellence and accountability for our students. Grounding us in core values and success indicators falls nicely within achievement as we talk about doing that exceptional work and constantly looking at continuous improvement. And also the success indicator that's been identified for our seniors. We want them to leave with one or more AP or dual credits or maybe industry certification so that they are well prepared for their post-secondary goals. So let's start with AP School Honor Roll. This is information that comes out from College Board. This is essentially a report on our class of 2023. So our previous graduating class. There's a lot of information here to unpack. The top half of the slide you can see is information on St. Charles East. The bottom half, St. Charles North. We've highlighted for you specific areas to look at to try to weed through the data, but let me explain further. So in addition to the levels of criteria, there are also the specific metrics. The first metric is college culture. That refers to students taking one AP exam at some point in their career. The second is college credit. That's, did they earn the college credit? Did they get 3 or better on one AP exam during their career? And the final one is more complicated, college optimization. This is students who took 5 or more AP exams, and one of those has to have been in the 9th or 10th grade year. Okay. You can see that both of our schools achieved silver status. In the areas of college credit and optimization, we were at gold and then subsequently the highest level platinum criteria for those students who are taking a whole lot of AP courses. In addition, both schools were awarded the Access Award, and this is unique. Typically, College Board will highlight schools who demonstrate clear and really effective commitments to equitable representation in AP courses and exams. And that's what this award says. It says that both of our schools, when we look at the demographics of each school and we compare it to the demographics of the students taking AP exams, that they mirror each other. So if I were in high school A, and let's say we had 50% low income in high school A, those low income students, that 50%, we'd also have 50% of low income students taking those AP exams as well. And both of our schools achieved that Access Award, which was a celebration. Any questions I can answer for you about the school honor roll? We're bringing forth a variety of recommendations for you this evening as we're pruning and growing and creating pathways for students consistent with, I know, the many conversations that have been had here as well. We're proposing some reductions to current course offerings, and these tend to be courses that aren't currently running. Students aren't electing to take these courses, so it makes sense to prune them at this time. And then we're also proposing 3 courses for potential additions to the 24-25 course offering booklet. So if we look at the first few, the first 3 reductions that are suggested, the speech, the English 12 British Literature Honors, and the Advanced Application of Technology, those courses have not run. However, please note that we have a dual credit option for speech that has been successfully running. So in listening to what our students are doing, they're opting for that dual credit option for speech. The English 12 British Lit Honors, there are many options for students to take an English course at the senior year. So we have dual credit English 101, 102. We have 2 AP options within the English department. We have other honors options as well. So this course has not been selected traditionally in the past. So we feel it's time to prune that.
Just a quick,
Yes.
quick question. When we say, can we define reduction
Yeah,
for us? What does that mean? Is
absolutely.
it completely out of the course offering book? What does it mean? I think that's
Excellent question. For these first 3, it means it would come out of the course offering booklet, so it wouldn't be available for students to choose any longer, and therefore wouldn't run as a course.
what would be the process for bringing something back that was removed?
Much like this process tonight, we want to make sure that we have complete transparency about what courses that we're sharing and what courses that we're offering to students. We've been thoughtful about the ones that we think need pruning because it's based on what students want.
Right.
In addition, if students are telling us they don't want these, we also might want to bring other courses as well. If for some reason there was a need on the part of the teachers or the students to bring that up for consideration, we could do that. But what you'd be making a decision on is what are we putting in the course offering booklet for next year for them to choose from.
Got it. Thank you.
So I think
You're welcome.
the other piece of how that comes to be is really through the curriculum assessment and instruction process. So once we remove these classes, though they won't be available, but within our curriculum process, if we're seeing something, we'll then run it through that process. And that's how the class would come back to you to again be voted on to be moved back into the as an offering for students.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to clarify,
For sure.
you know, because we jumped a little bit right into it, right? So seeing that, I appreciate that clarification. Also the clarification on the art history piece as well.
Absolutely. Let me speak a little bit to that. So I hope what comes through in the presentation is the amount of collaboration that we've had, not just amongst the people in this room, but with our department chairs and also our teachers. None of these decisions are made in a vacuum. So there's lots of dialogue about how to best do that. So we don't come back and have to offer classes that we've pruned. And one really important point that was brought up with respect to art history. So we do offer an AP art history currently that is running. And we also recognize that it might be hard to gather which students might be interested in studying art history. So as much as we are going to continue to run AP art history, and we're concerned that the non-AP art history has not had a lot of students. We're talking 4 to 8 students that have had an interest in that over the last 3 years. Given that, we don't want to completely remove it from the course offering booklet because this is the way that our AP art history teacher is gathering who's interested in art history. So what it might potentially look like right now is I sign up for art history, not AP. But then as I move into that course, this teacher recognizes I'm interested in art history, and we do have students that actually move up once they start the course. So we don't want to cut off that dialogue of I'm interested in art history, but I may not realize that I could be an AP art history student.
Can I take AP art history without a prerequisite? Is this a okay?
Yes, that's a great question. This is not a prerequisite to AP art history, but if we leave it in the course offering booklet, then even if we're not running the course, it gives that AP art history teacher the opportunity to say, I have a pipeline for students who might be good candidates for an AP course.
Potentially also something for our guidance counselors when they are doing the scheduling to suggest as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
just a discussion that we had in our planning meeting was regarding, folks think that this was the knee-jerk decision. For the last several years, as I understand it, there was little to zero enrollment in some of these courses. So, my concern was, are we making a knee-jerk reaction just because of, a year or two we haven't seen enrollment? And it's actually longer periods of time where we've seen zero enrollment in these courses. Is that correct?
That
Dr.
is
Igo?
correct. Yes, we pulled the data over the last 5 years, made some decisions as we looked through that so that we were being very thoughtful. And, this idea around the art history really came because we sat down with the art history teacher and said, here's what we're doing and here's why. This is the feedback that they received. And we're like, that's really good feedback because there isn't an AP potential, right? We get AP potential scores for a whole lot of things, not art history. So this really does allow us to make sure that we're continuing to offer that high bar for students.
If I can ask real quickly, what, and I, just for my own edification, what is the cutoff for whether or not a course would be run? I know we've been given that number in the past, but I don't recall.
Well, there isn't an established number. Generally speaking, it's looking, is it a capstone class? Is it an AP class? And so AP art history has run concurrently or stacked with the standard art history to get a number over, over 12 to that point. But if we have the names of the students who are interested in standard art history, then the teacher can reach out, the counselors can reach out, to your point, to those students to talk to them about their skills and their interests so that they could be in the AP art history course.
I'm actually speaking in more general terms about any courses, if I obviously if only one or two students are interested, but at what would be the threshold at which we'd say that's probably a course we would like to run?
And there's not a set number across the board. Typically that number is around 15 to 16 or higher. But again, it depends on whether or not it's a capstone course or whether it's something that we've promised, a sequence kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the multi-language learners. We would not want to eliminate something that they've already started that we've committed to them. And I also wanted to clarify when Christine was talking about the conversation and looking at 5 years of data, that conversation was including Tina King and included both principals. It included the assistant principals for instructional programming, as well as myself in talking through and literally course by course, the last 5 years of enrollment data to discuss and determine which courses might be in line to be sunset. I just wanted to use that out loud. Thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah. Did we also engage counselors at all and get their feedback?
They were not a part of that conversation because we were looking strategically at the data of enrollment of the students for that. And then the assistant principals did have conversations with the department chairs in their home buildings who then share that information, kind of as Christine was saying, also with their teachers within the departments, which brought forward some of this new thinking as we look at art history.
Okay. I'm just wondering if they might have an anecdotal or a context beyond the data. It's just a thought.
Yeah, and the data that we looked at was not just who ended up in the courses, but it was from what's called the simple tally. So it was from the course request. So any of the courses that students initially requested last year, as well as the last or the prior 4 years, like if they expressed an interest in the course, that's the number that was looked at. And then the counselors would have those conversations in the event that a course wasn't running to see if there was a kind of an alternate.
Yeah.
So, but I hear what you're saying, and those are conversations that we can certainly engage in with our counselors. But at this point, that wasn't what fed the data.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think there could be an opportunity there. And then I just wanted to clarify. So if I'm a student that I don't feel comfortable taking AP art history, am I hearing you right that the art history and the AP art history, they're running in the same class? Basically, so there's an opportunity there still. Okay.
But I think looking forward, one of the things we're proposing here is that the non-AP art history wouldn't run as a class. That instead we'd be keeping it in the course offering booklet in order to honor that teachers and a group of teachers requests to say, who are these students that we could then connect with to bring into AP art history.
But isn't it today?
It is.
Both students in one class. Why would we not, if we had students that weren't comfortable taking the AP? I understand absolutely the the initiative to try and get students to move to the AP, but why would we
Because
take away the opportunity?
they don't, aren't we forcing them to take the AP exam if they are in the AP class?
Yes, we do.
Right? So if I'm interested in our history, but I'm not interested in taking the AP exam for it, the district's going to say you have to take the exam, right?
Right, but what I'm asking today, we have one teacher that teaches AP art history and art history in the same class.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, why would we not continue that model? Because you're not adding expense. That makes sense.
So with the stacked or concurrent teaching, the teacher is teaching two different curricula
Yep.
simultaneously. And so they're working with the students, the 8 students that are in the AP section and teaching the AP curriculum as outlined by College Board. And then while those students are working independently or separately, then they're going to instruct the 3 other students who are not in the AP. And so they're double teaching.
Right.
And so they're not providing the equal number or equal amount of support in terms of instruction or feedback or attention to each of the groups as they're working with the opposite group.
So it's not working today.
It's
what I'm hearing you say.
it's a
That's
struggle and
where
it's
people
the
are going.
differentiation is difficult. But I also will tell you that the teacher shared that often the students who are in the standard section will be listening, because you can hear the other instruction that's occurring and say, I can do that. And then oftentimes they will transition or shift into, and so they end up with all AP or very much majority AP. And one of the interesting statements was that one of the years over the last couple, the 2 students who started in standard that then transitioned, and because they knew that they could then handle AP, ended up with the highest AP scores on the exam that particular year. And so that's what we're talking about, is the opportunity, if a student is suggesting that they're interested in art history standard, to have that conversation about what are the skills that are required for the AP art history course, and what are the supports that student might need or perceive that they need before entering the course, to be able to have them enroll in that AP course, because that helps us with our strategic priority, in our criteria of having all students with 1 or more AP or dual credit courses.
Thank you.
Okay, we're also moving forward with some additions to course offerings, and on the subsequent slides, I'll walk you through some more details about these courses. The first one would be AP Pre-Calculus starting next year. The next one is AP Computer Science Principles and College Preparatory English. I'll give you some information first about AP Pre-Calculus. So AP Pre-Calculus is designed to be the equivalent of a first semester pre-calculus course at the college level, really for the purpose of creating a strong foundation for high-level math and science, not just calculus, but definitely including calculus. The recommended prerequisites would be completion of those concepts that are already within our AGA curriculum, and students would move to those just after. Rationale, a couple things. College Board recommends AP Pre-Calculus because it gets students ready for calculus, but also because it gives students an opportunity for college credit, right in line with a lot of our focus here. Improved placement as well, and also provides a standout for colleges. When colleges see that there are multiple levels of a mathematics course offered and they see a student chose to take on the challenge of an AP course, that makes them stand out compared to peers. In alignment with our goals here that we work from, this course counts for all of the AP honor roll and capstone calculations that College Board does, which just allows our students to maximize their AP experience going forward.
Can I ask a point of clarification here real quickly? And I'll wait for you to go this because I don't want to make you repeat yourself. So.
Okay, thank you. We wanted to look at it from the perspective of students, and there are a few benefits to students that really stood out. The first is, by providing AP Pre-Calculus, we're giving every student in our high schools an opportunity to walk away from high school with an AP credit in mathematics. And that's not necessarily the case right now. Students who start in algebra freshman year can end in AP Pre-Calculus and take that credit and that experience with them in order to improve their college placement. The second is that regardless of the math pathway, whether a student chooses to culminate with AP Statistics, AP Calculus AB, BC, AP Pre-Calculus, if that were the case, that we've increased their AP credits in mathematics by 1. So we've created more. In our most advanced student pathways, and we do have many students in significantly advanced mathematics pathways, students who are starting in Algebra 2 freshman year, but also students who are starting in pre-calculus freshman year. Now we've shifted them up to at least 3 AP credits in mathematics going into college. So the opportunities for learning are there earlier. The opportunities for exposure to college level mathematics are there earlier. So we're enhancing that experience a little further. Also, that preparation for AP calculus, it's there whether they receive college credit for AP pre-calculus or not. They have improved their chances of placing higher on college entrance exams. So we're taking them out of any sort of non-remedial track, any remedial track, or having to pay for a course to take prior to calculus without credit. So we're improving what their knowledge base is as well. Please.
Well, I'm glad I waited because you answered one of my questions. So,
Wonderful.
thank you for that. So for our AP pre-calc starting in next year, is that a precursor to AP Calc AB, AP Calc BC, either? And reason why I ask is, as we discussed in our planning meeting, I just looked at a couple of course catalogs from some of our aspirational districts, and it appears that some of them offer separate offerings for those AP Pre-Calc AB, AP Pre-Calc BC as precursors to those other calc classes.
Yeah.
Is ours a catch-all? Would ours only satisfy Pre-Calc AB? Can you expand on that for me, please?
Absolutely. The AP Pre-Calculus course is actually designed to be delivered in 4 modules or units. Technically, the AP Pre-Calculus exam only requires competency in the first 3. Okay, so the 4th AP Pre-Calculus unit is essentially a part of the course, but it's not something students will be tested on. And this is where I think some of the districts you may be looking at are incorporating this into their planning. So think of it this way. If I were offering 2 levels of AP pre-calculus, I could in theory offer, like you said, a level AB that would be those first 3 units, and that would prepare students both to take the AP exam for pre-calculus. It would also prepare them very well for Calc AB and or BC. The stronger preparation for BC would probably come from that other AP pre-calculus course if they chose to teach that 4th module or unit. And that's sometimes why you see the leveling. In our case, we've actually already engaged with a dialogue quite a bit with our math department chairs around this information. And there is an interest in leveling. But we are trying to be thoughtful as we create pathways that we also don't close doors. So our AP pre-calculus would in theory just be that, and it would be all 4 units that are within the College Board course. But one of the options that is currently being discussed and fleshed out is, could a potential honors pre-calculus cover those 3 units that are essential for the AP exam, so that students who took honors pre-calculus could then qualify? They would be well prepared to also take the AP test, which we know students don't have to take the course to take the test. And that could be a potential way to level as well. And I think there are districts trying to figure out how to do that in order to create the pathway to BC. BC is a much more robust course than AB. Both pre-calculus courses could prepare you, but that one that includes the 4th unit would just be even more robust. And that would prepare you more for a year-long college calculus experience, which is what BC is.
Yeah, that provides a lot of clarity. Thank you. And I think you're spot on with that. I also noticed that some of them are year-long courses, and ours would be a semester-long course, correct?
We would be a year-long course. Our AP pre-calculus
Would be year-long. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, the semester reference on the slide is, if this were a college course being offered at a university, it would just be a semester-long course.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So just to clarify, so this is, I believe, AP pre-calculus is the first year that it's been offered.
That is
right?
correct.
So I guess I'm interested, and maybe this is for a separate discussion, but I'm interested in how we're going to monitor and measure how this works in our high schools, because next year would be the 2nd year that the curriculum would even be in effect.
Absolutely. With any AP course, and AP pre-calculus is not different, there are potentially recommended resources that could be used. It's not an exhaustive list, but one of the conversations that was really helpful with the department chairs was that very question of guaranteed and viable, being consistent, and also what resource do we want to use to teach this course. So an AP pre-calculus course is not somebody handing you a textbook and saying, now go teach AP pre-calculus. It's instead an outline of 4 modules with key concepts that we can then align to a resource, for instance. So I think some of that monitoring comes from the fact that the next part of this conversation is the conversation about the implementation and the resource that happens with the department chairs and with the teachers.
Okay.
We
And
grow from
then for the prerequisites, standard courses are
Yes.
considered eligible for this.
That is correct. So you do not need to be in honors geometry and honors algebra 2 in order to take an AP pre-calculus course. You do not. You can certainly be in the standard track and be prepared to take this course. Does that mean that every single student will move from algebra 2 to AP pre-calculus?
Right.
No, absolutely not. I'm sure students will make other decisions, but certainly it's accessible. It is accessible to them. And that's College Board's premise is these courses are not exclusive. They should be open to any student who is prepared, motivated, and willing to do this work.
Yeah, I was just more interested in the teachers' feedback around the honors versus the standard and that jump to AP. So yeah, I appreciate what the College Board says.
Yeah, I think, and I'm just gonna, in that conversation that we had, I happened to be present when we had that conversation. They were the ones who said, we need to have this option around kind of the honors AP. And then the honors pre-calc and then AP pre-calc, uniting the same. It was their thinking, and they felt really strongly that that would provide the support that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I'm asking for clarity around the prerequisites. And if you're taking standard.
I understand what you're
algebra,
saying.
Geometry, algebra 2. Just how confident are we? How much of a stretch is that going to be?
I think it's a really good question. I want to emphasize that College Board actually says, they don't say you have to complete these courses in their entirety or at this level. They say that the fundamental concepts within an algebra, a geometry, and an algebra 2 course are prerequisites. How you teach those, the depth at which you teach those is going to be individualized to your district. So the concepts are there. If we look at our standard or our honors track for those 3 courses, the concepts that are prerequisites are all there. So it's not so much a course, even though we lump them in and name them as a course. I think one of the things you're pointing out, though, that's really important as well is that preparedness and readiness. And certainly if somebody's taking an AP pre-calculus course that's going to be enriched with all 4 modules, that is a fast-paced, rigorous course. And that's something to consider. So what is that pacing? What is that readiness on the part of that student to do that? I think it's an excellent question.
Yeah, and I think as we continue to move forward with our PLC process and we're gathering evidence every 5 days, we're going to have a really good pulse on where kids are. And we have these ongoing conversations with our department chairs that we'll have a sense when they're like, whoa, 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 we need to rethink this. And we'll come back to the board and say, we need to rethink.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just piggyback on one quick prerequisite question. It dawned something on my mind as well. So the AP pre-cal covers those 4 principles you were talking about, but it is a precursor to AP Calc AB. That's like a tongue twister. So they would not be permitted to enroll directly into AP Calc BC.
From AP pre-calculus?
Correct.
Yes, they could.
Oh, they could.
They could absolutely go straight to AP Calculus BC. Both are options. It comes down to, once again, much like what Mrs. Fairgrave was alluding to with the previous shift, is AP Calculus AB is a semester-long college calculus course that's spread out over a year. AP Calculus BC is a year-long calculus course, college level, that's taught in a year. So you are prepared with the prerequisite knowledge to do that, but the pacing and intensity of that course is a decision in and of itself.
So would we be vetting them according to perhaps their score on their exam, the grade in the class? And I know we're not getting into pathway discussion, but it spawned my curiosity when you asked that question. How would we vet those students to know that they could get to the terminal class as opposed to taking the prerequisite for that class?
So I think what's really important to remember is that we are challenged by choice, right? So we don't stop anybody from enrolling in any course that they should choose to do so. However, teachers will always engage in conversations with students to say, you might want to think about and going straight into Calculus BC because I've seen that you've mastered this content and you know this well. Don't be afraid to take the challenge, or you might want to take this here. But ultimately, we are challenged by choice.
But we do get teacher recommendations.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. And if we can make a recommendation, just want to be clear that a student can make the choice to override the recommendation.
I have one more question. So today we have pre-calc trig. So does this AP pre-calculus include trig?
Yeah, and much, much more. And I think
Okay.
that's one of the conversations that's happening with the department chairs is this is not a huge shift, but it's a little bit of a shift to go to this course, and how do we honor what needs to be in the curriculum and also lay that out appropriately relative to the 4 modules. Yeah, absolutely. If I can switch gears now away from AP pre-calculus and talk about AP computer science principles. This is equivalent to a 1 semester, or what they might refer to as a first semester broad course regarding computer science. The prerequisites here are Algebra 1, that's it. And some questions around that in my mind, like Algebra 1, interesting. It doesn't seem like part of a progression from Algebra 1, but anyone who works within the maths, the sciences, or computational thinking in general knows that Algebra 1 can be a basis for computational thinking and pattern making, and that's really important within the computer science realm. So students who have completed an Algebra 1 course would then be eligible to take computer science principles at the AP level. So if I come in as a freshman and I've already just completely, let's say, completed algebra and/or algebra and geometry, I could sign up for this AP course as a freshman, which means that our sophomores who have all completed algebra would all be able to sign up for this course as a sophomore. Did a little bit of an audit looking at the school profiles at both North and East, and looking at those colleges that we actually sent our students to for our class of 2023, and looking at that list of schools, about 26, if I remember correctly. Every single one of them is offering credit for AP computer science principles. And some of them even as a major credit, which is interesting. It shows the meatiness of the course, the respect for the course already. Think of University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I mean, I think of that because that is a university that oftentimes will require an introductory computer science class for almost all majors. That's pretty standard. Any of you went there? No, you probably took CS 105. And some of us still remember. Fond memories, right. And based on your score in the AP exam for AP computer science principles, if you get a 3 or a 4, then you actually receive 4 hours of credit for computer science 102. If you get a 5, you get credit for computer science 105. And these are not low-level computer science courses. You have to have knowledge of binary and Boolean principles and algorithmic thinking, and it's high level, and that's what this course would do for us as well. From the student perspective, this is an exciting course. It takes really complex computer science and scaffolds it backwards to make it accessible to students. Things like block coding instead of having to code outright. Just all of an overview of the internet rather than looking at specific applications, but understanding networking. This is a complex course that's made extremely accessible through the College Board offering. Some benefits for students. Every student's eligible to take it after they've completed algebra. It's an exciting way to experience computer science at an early age in high school. This course allows students to kind of begin to explore that information technology pathway. The exciting thing about computer science principles is it's a bit of a precursor to Computer Science A, which is an AP course that we already offer. With those two courses together, there's actually already a pretty extensive articulated path that can happen dual credit wise after those are completed. And those paths can be a pathway to I'd like to get a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science one day, or it could be a networking certification, an industry credential. It could be something in informatics. There's a lot of options that this course, just by providing it, opens up to students that is a little bit harder to grab onto without this course being offered. More exposure to computational thinking, pattern making, thinking through algorithms. And then the unique approach to this course is this AP exam is more than just a multiple choice exam. Students actually spend a good chunk of time within the course writing their own programming code. It exposes them to an additional programming language. Computer Science A is specifically Java. It has to be, but this particular course allows us to bring in an additional language to give students an opportunity to create and build in this language and then use that as a part of their portfolio for the AP exam, which is a very different experience. Nice way to engage students in the study of computer science.
Do we need any additional equipment or anything else to support the offering of this course?
So this course is unique in that a lot of what's provided is through individual providers that we can choose from.
Okay.
Because of the nature of the work. So typically we would have to create, say, a syllabus and get it approved. And we actually can adopt syllabi from some of these providers that are working in the computer science field. That's relevant because we have some options around that. There are plenty of options, code.org, et cetera, that we can just use the Chromebooks that students have, that we don't need additional resources. There are some we may want to explore that have more, but given the nature of the course and what's accessible online, there should be minimal cost to that.
And then, at least for now, this would be nested under the math department, correct?
Yes, that's a great question. We've already started engaging in that conversation, by the way, naturally, this is just expanding our offerings in this particular area. Right now, it's housed within the math department and it would be, but I think that conversation about where it ultimately lives is a good question because we're overlapping a little bit here with some other departments. And then there's also a really specific information technology pathway that starts to be carved out for an individual student just by taking this course and maybe a subsequent course. So I think that's the ongoing conversation. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of the professional learning and also the financial impact. College Board recommends when we adopt a course that we allocate about $1,900 to $3,200 per AP course. It's really to support some of that professional learning, the summer institutes, and also the workshops that are offered. In conversations with our department chairs and teachers, we know that they are excited to get started on some of this work if you would choose to approve it. And many of them have made requests to go ahead and not wait till summer, but start with some of those January workshops so that they can start doing that planning. So some of this money would be allocated to that and potentially some resources. There are some texts that are available that we could discuss and consider through a CAI process or conversations with teachers that we could buy to support. If there were additional resources that we would need to request from you after really valuing the teacher voice and pulling the teachers fully into the conversation, if you were to approve these courses, then we would bring back those financial requests if they did exist for your consideration. The final course that we're recommending adding is the College Preparatory English. I want to paint a picture of maybe the student that's taking College Preparatory English that may help. Typically, this is a student who's not quite ready for an AP English course in senior year and not quite ready for that dual credit English course in senior year as well. But instead is ready to do some college prep work in order to secure the best possible credit-bearing placement when they move on to their post-secondary plans. This really has come out of a lot of work that's been done by some of our teachers and department chairs around constructing what this curriculum would look like. That work has been done and ready to go. That's in concert with ECC and our Northern King District's participants. It's really a more of a nonfiction informational based class. There's even a component of it that allows students to start thinking about how do you want to construct your college entrance essays and creating an annotated bibliography, which is such an important skill in order to move into post-secondary work. Students who complete this course with an overall grade of C or better, it guarantees them student placement into college-bearing courses. with that reading and writing prerequisite at any Illinois community college and select universities in Illinois. This may sound familiar. It's similar to that transitional math course that we offer, if I can paint that picture as well. And really it satisfies also that Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, where we really do need to prepare students for non-remedial credit-bearing coursework in this area. So it does satisfy that as well. Just remind you of our recommendations again for your consideration. We're looking to reduce a few classes that have not been running and also support art history with still gleaning who those students are to maybe move them into the AP world, and then adding AP calculus, computer science principles, and college preparatory English.
Thank you very much. You did an amazing job.
Oh,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Questions or?
Does this then come to consent agenda? Does it go to full board? What's next steps with this?
So you'll see the whole course offering is we're going to go through the whole pathway. So this is kind of that precursor. Those are some of the pieces that we could get done sooner rather than later. So you'll see this incoming in the overall course offering book, but we plan to move forward with this work.
So I think it needs to go to the November board meeting.
Yep.
Yep, and it needs to be approved. Whether or not you need additional information from us or not would determine whether it's consent or for action.
Yeah, because the reason I was asking is specifically around the professional learning opportunities that are coming up, right? I want our teachers to be able to take advantage of those, especially if we're leaning towards this.
So what we heard was, I mean, based off the conversation, I did move just to consent.
And we want the kids to see it. It needs to get into the
Yes.
catalog, which is much earlier than we think.
Yes, the board meeting is November 13th and the course offering catalog goes live on the 14th. So the 13th and the 14th. So
We are
it'll
not
be
cutting it close at all.
not.
No pressure.
That's why tonight's conversation was so important and your feedback. But what we're taking from it is that this would move to consent, that the team will be building these in or pruning or sunsetting, sunsetting.
So if I can suggest, that one of the reasons we put things on action as opposed to consent sometimes is just what Mrs. McCabe said. We want to make sure the kids know. So I would suggest that if we're not going to put this on action, at least we make sure that it's known, if that's an important thing that.
It will be. Thank you.
And I would suggest as you go home and think about things and you still have some questions, get it to Dr. Igo as soon as possible.
Yes. We will have the book ready to roll with we have draft next to things, and then once it's approved, we'll pull the draft off so we can go live. We are ready.
Well, thank you again. I learned a ton and I think your presentation was very clear. So thank you so much.
Before you move on to next agenda items here, I just want to highlight something that maybe was pretty obvious for everybody, but I want to highlight it for a moment. Just the sheer amount of collaboration that is occurring through the L&T department, specifically around this work tonight, was a significant amount of time with our department chairs. So really reaching back into the contract negotiation and how important department chairs and how important it is to really partner with our educators in this process. I'm incredibly proud of our learning teaching team and the partnership that we don't lead from the district office. We're working alongside, we're working with our educators to do this work. And I think you heard every presenter here tonight really talk about that partnership and where we're going. And you'll continue to hear that type of language in the future. So just incredibly proud of our educators, incredibly proud of our learning teaching team to really do this work together for the betterment of students. As Dr. Igo pointed out, the AP art history literally was from a teacher saying, hey, listen to my voice. This is really important here. Don't sunset this yet. But just wanted to take a moment to highlight the collaboration that is occurring in D303 with our learning teaching and our amazing educators out in the field.
I also wanted to say I really appreciated the presentation. So thank you. You're not at the table anymore, but thank you very much. I thought it was incredibly informative. I actually couldn't come up with any questions. So no, thank you so much. I really, really appreciated all the reports tonight. Thank you.
And just to tag along, this is the time of year where all the rubber hits the road for teachers and the work that goes on. So we know that we've asked a lot. Surprise. We've asked a lot of our educators, our leaders and our staff, and we do appreciate what you bring to the table for us because we go away better informed as to what our kids need and how we can be better leaders for our kids. So thank you very much. So that brings us to adjournment. Dr. Igo, you want to fill us in a little bit on a few things that might be coming our way?
Absolutely. So in the month of November, at the regular board meeting, we'll be presenting the student achievement report. So we'll be providing that information on November 13th. And then our next L&T meeting, which is actually November 27th because of the Thanksgiving break. That's when we'll be coming back to the table to really talk through how and what's our plan, our action plan to ensure that our multilingual learners and our Hispanic students who may be underperforming, we've got a plan to ensure that they're going to continue to learn at high levels. So that will be our next big thing. And we're going to try to keep that November meeting just to that report, so that we can really spend the time and the energy to go deep.
Thank you. All right.
So I just had one ask, and I don't know if it might fit under especially a student achievement report or not, but we've recently, a lot of families have received the science assessment results for, I think it's third.
Oh, the
fifth, eighth, yep. And so I'm interested in how we're interpreting that data across the system, what action plans, if necessary, we're doing to attack that. And then also, how does that dovetail into the changes that we're anticipating next year at the elementary level, because we're shifting more to a science core focus than we have in the past versus the empower. So
there's a lot there.
Yeah.
So what I can say is we can certainly add in the science scores into our student achievement report and talk through those. I would say you would have to give us maybe an opportunity to come back when we're ready to bring those science courses forward to really talk through what that means, because that's between now and November, we wouldn't really have the opportunity to unpack that with our current empowered teachers to think about what does that mean and how does it impact the work that we do here, as well as giving us, we met actually today with our science department chairs talking about our CAI. So they'll want some opportunity to look through that. They're going to use that data to help them make some decisions. So I don't know that I'd be ready to give you a plan on that, but I can at least put it into context for you and then talk to you about what our next steps would be.
Yeah.
In September, in November, September.
Yeah, that's certainly, I mean, I think a timeline would be wonderful.
We can totally do that.
Okay, anything else, board members? I didn't make 6:45. So.
You did not.
But it is 7:42. And we have come to an adjournment. Thank you.